Aloha, everyone. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Kawika Winter. He's a multidisciplinary ecologist dedicated to large-scale biocultural restoration in Hawaii. Kawika's work spans traditional resource management, conservation, and policy. After over a decade as director at Limahuli Garden and Preserve on Kauai, he now serves as the reserve manager at Heʻeia National Estuarine Research Reserve here on Oahu. He also holds a faculty position at the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology, is an affiliate faculty in the Natural Resources and Environmental Management Department, and is a research associate with the National Tropical Botanical Garden. Next, I have here is Ty McLean Maaz. She earned her doctorate in soil science from Washington State University, and her research specialties and interests include soil science, soil health, nutrient management, agricultural data science, and statistics. Ty is currently an assistant professor here at UH Manoa in the Department of Tropical Plant and Soil Sciences.
Thank you. Poppers? Oh.
Can you get this one?
Go.
I can't get into
I'll let you do that.
it.
No, for you.
For me.
You gotta cut the lane
Okay, could I?
because you're pregnant.
Oh.
Hey, aloha mai Kākoʻo. Mahalo. Ta'uko kono ana mai ia'u. We got it. Thank you for having me. Happy to share. I just clicked the arrow in this thing. Is that okay? You have a clicker. It's okay. So I'm happy to share with you. I'm obviously wearing my favorite shirt. So one of the things that we're gonna talk about today is a general topic that folks like me talk about is Indigenous knowledge. I am amazed that people still don't know what this is when we use this term. I was just in a meeting where we're doing some strategic planning over on the continent, and they were describing Indigenous knowledge as a social science, if you notice that, Rachel, or as a cultural ecosystem service. I mean, no. Indigenous knowledge is not a social science. Indigenous knowledge is not a cultural ecosystem service. Indigenous knowledge is the entirety of the knowledge of Indigenous people. It explains how the world works and our relationship to it and things like that. So we're going to be engaging in this realm a little bit. And I have increasingly been referring to myself as a knowledge weaver because I've been formally trained in these two ways of knowing and two ways of understanding the world. And I think that's what our talk is today is going to be about, the way we do that. Using using the example of the research program that we have over in Heʻeia, with some tangible examples of how we're doing that with some colleagues here in the room. So I wanted to just share a story about a place, Heʻeia. Who's been here? Almost everybody have? Okay. So this is the place on the other side of the island, in the mohu of Ko'olapoko. That's okay, I'll be fine. I'm wearing my favorite shirt, I can do it. So Heʻeia, Hawaiian place. If this is a really important place anciently, and we like to think it's an important place today. So Heʻeia, one interpretation of that word literally means to be washed away, and this harkens back to a story from the ancestral past that references a great flood or tidal wave, depending on how you interpret the words, where the people got swept away. And in the aftermath of that disaster, the community rebuilt in a very resilient way. So if there's a community in Hawaii that we're looking to study climate resilience and how communities of the past and Pacific Islands have built resilient communities, this is the perfect place to do it. Jumping forward a few hundred years into the early 20th century, 1930s, so it's about 100 years ago. This bay, anciently called Kowaho Komano, now referred to as Kaneohe Bay, started to be dredged There's a military base over here now. We wanted to expand the runway so that the bigger military planes could come in. So I started dredging the reefs over here. I wanted to make a channel. That started in the late 30s. And then we're heading into World War II. And then all that happened. And after the war, America obviously won. And then this place became America and became very prosperous. And there's a lot of development. So all this development here happened in the post-war era in the 1940s, moving into the 50s. And this is the wet side of the island. So in the absence of environmental protections, there's a lot of grubbing and grading, and then the rains would come and all of the sediment would go into the bay and become chocolate brown every time it rained. And then they built a municipal wastewater facility, I think about there, to support all of the sewage from all of this development. And then guess where they dumped that? They dumped it straight into the bay, which caused this big bloom of algae and phytoplankton. And then the bay turned pea green. So it would rain, the bay would be brown. On regular days, it would be pea green from all the nutrients going in the water. Around the same period, there's unregulated commercial fishing happening that led to a collapse of several fisheries in the bay. And so this is getting into the 40s, 50s, 60s. All of this is happening decade after decade. This place is getting hammered. And then we're getting into the 1960s. So in the 1960s, again, there's a military base over here. There were plans to build a nuclear power plant on the side of the island to power the base, but they weren't going to put it next to the base. They were going to put it across the bay in a Native Hawaiian community of Heʻeia. Right over here is where the plans were for it. So the Native Hawaiians at that time, people who are kupuna now or are elders in the community, they got together and said, no, we don't want a nuclear power plant in our backyard. So they organized themselves. They sued the utility company, and after a 10-year battle, they went all the way up to the Hawaii Supreme Court. They won in court, which is the first time a Native Hawaiian community ever beat a utility company in the court system. So they won that battle. So now we're getting into the 70s, but this is the 60s onward was an era of great protection for Heʻeia. So they protected over here, and we're getting into the 68 to 70s, moving into the 80s. All this land over here at one point was owned by Kamehameha Schools, and in the 80s there was plans to develop that. They were going to dredge this 800-year-old fish pond and fill in the wetland, make this a private boat marina, make this a gated community where the people could keep their boats. But the community, after realizing that after feeling empowered, they decided to focus on protecting this from development. They eventually won that. So after these major wins of stopping construction of a nuclear power plant and stopping the destruction of the fish pond and the Lo'i system for development, they decided to turn their efforts, their time and energy on protecting the bay. So again, this used to be a super productive place that was supporting thousands of people for hundreds of years sustainably. But for decades, from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, they've just been ecologically trashed. So they got organized themselves again, got some funding from the legislature to work on for a few years on creating a Kaneohe Bay master plan that articulated some protections for the bay, that was forward-looking to think about restoration of the bay back to a state of abundance. And in 1992, that was published. And one of the recommendations was at the very end of the document was to the designation of a National Estuarine Research Reserve, which is a program funded by NOAA. And the idea was that this is a research program that could conduct research and inform how the bay could be restored. So the original vision was for all of Kaneohe Bay, but after 25 years of process and the community level and within state government and federal government, which is a long political process, juggling these three layers of politics, they decided to make it just really small, just in Heʻeia. So the orange is the boundaries of Heʻeia, and this is the boundaries of the National Estuarine Research Reserve there that I'm the director of. And that was signed into existence on Obama's last day in office, January 17th, 2017. And then it took a while for UH to get everybody staffed up, we get the reserve staffed up. So they hired people like me as the director and Shimi Ri'i as the research coordinator, Fred Rapun as education coordinator. They're the first hires, and we were hired as faculty members out here at the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology, which is why I have an appointment there in my position. So that's a little context for the story we're going to tell. But what is the National Estuarine Research Reserve System, or NERR, as we say in for short? They're a network of 30 reserves around America, in coastal areas and in Great Lakes. It's usually a co-management agreement between federal and state. In this case, it's always NOAA's federal funding and then a state entity. In some states, it's basically their DLNR or their parks division, but in Hawaii, the state entity is the University of Hawaiʻi at Mānoa. But being that this is Hawaii, and if you want to do things right, you don't do it without the Native Hawaiian community. This is the first NERR in the nation that can be considered a three-way co-stewardship agreement that includes the Native Hawaiian community. So when this job came up, and people were trying to recruit me to apply, I was thinking, wow, to run a federally funded research program in a Native Hawaiian community sounds like career suicide. No, thank you. But they said, no, you should really look at it. And so I looked into it and I looked at this story. I found this story that I just told you guys about these Pupuna who are well known as some of the called Hamas in Hawaiian community. They're really staunch advocates and they're well known, and they were the ones advocating for this reserve to be in their community. So that's people like Rocky Kaluhiva and her late husband, Dre Kaluhiva, and some other people not pictured here. Like, wow, this is a federally funded research program that the Native Hawaiians wanted in their community. Like, maybe we'll give this a shot. So I ended up applying and got the job. So this is what I'm doing now. So again, the reserve, I showed that image earlier, about 1,300 acres, multiple habitats going from coastal forest to wetlands to estuary, stream, coral reef, those kinds of things. And we're stewarded as an indigenous and community conserved area. So we describe ourselves as being indigenous designed, indigenous led, conservation and research program, one of the first in America to be able to claim that. We have 7 co-management partners, and this is kind of important. So there's 7, which is an odd number. Each of these 7 partners have a seat on my governing board. So my boss is basically this board made up of these partners, but there's 4 that come from Native Hawaiian organizations, which means that the majority vote on my board is always going to be Native Hawaiian. And that was intentionally done to ensure that this research reserve is always serving place and people of place. And it can't be like taken by some dean at UH and turned into something else that doesn't serve the community anymore. And then we take this federal money and it's administered through Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology, where I'm a faculty member. So ultimately our goal is to support community led restoration efforts using indigenous resource management practices. This is a picture from about a decade ago. You folks know the place. This hole has been fixed. These mangroves are almost all gone. There's just a few over here that are left. But we are a research reserve and we have a research methodology. We are trying to be a leader in co-developed research. And so we're trying to really flip the script of what university research looks like. If we could say the research that's happening atop Mauna Kea is probably the wrong way to do research, then what is the right way to do research? And how can we be an example for UH of the right way to do research from the perspective of a Native Hawaiian community? And so there's this paper we wrote. I'm not going to go into the details, but ultimately it's about co-development. It's about getting together with the community. It's putting the community in the driver's seat and putting university research in the backseat as a support mechanism for what the community wants for itself. And we describe this as reciprocal collaboration. And that's manifest in a lot of different ways that I won't go into detail too much now, but I can answer questions later. So we do have an overarching research question that guides our research endeavors, is basically to understand what biocultural restoration, what the impacts are of biocultural restoration on ecosystem services. So biocultural restoration is a kind of trending term right now, one that people like me are using quite a bit. There's still a lot of people who don't really understand this. So the way I describe it is in terms of colonization and the impacts of colonization. If you can look at the impacts of colonization as, or the result of colonization as severed relationships, we have severed relationships between Indigenous people and our ancestors and our land and our language and the biodiversity that shaped the identities and the languages of our ancestors. And biocultural restoration is a pathway to heal that. And so when communities like Heʻeia and other places are engaging in this form of restoration, a form of conservation that heals human-nature relationships, and instead of continuing the severing, then what can that look like? Because a standard approach to conservation that's founded in the ethic of American environmentalism is identifying people as a problem. If you're going to solve the problem in nature, you get rid of the people. You put up a fence, keep people out, or you create an MPA, a no-take MPA, and keep people out of the ocean. But that doesn't work. It just perpetuates social injustices on Indigenous people. So there's another way to do it. So the way this is looking like in Heʻeia is step one in biocultural restoration, removing the invasive species that have taken a foothold over the last 100 years. So this is a picture of active removal of Florida mangroves that are not native here. And then step two, using Indigenous knowledge to restore the landscape with nature-based solutions is another trending term right now. But basically the infrastructure related to wetland agroecology and indigenous aquaculture. And as a result, our native species are coming back. So I think I've talked about enough, and I think we're going to transition now to an example of a research program, another research program that's based here that is collaborating with us.
While we're transitioning, there are extras in here if you'd like. Sorry.
Hey, so aloha mai Kākoʻo. First, thank you, Kawika, for starting off the presentation, and thank you for having us in the seminar, and thanks for organizing the special series. So yes, I want to talk about some soil health monitoring that we are doing at Kākoʻo ʻŌiwi. And first, I want to introduce the soil health assessments that we're doing, a little bit background on as to what that involves. So we've developed a Hawaiʻi Soil Health Index over the past, I think, 6 years now, 7 years. It's been a long time in the making. This picture right here is the first master's student that worked on it. Her name is Hannah Eubanks. So she spent time during her master's sampling a lot of different soil types across different systems. So we start off with that data set of 66 soil samples. So I'll show you those locations. That's where we started, and we've continued collecting soil samples, and we have representation from Kākoʻo ʻŌiwi. Second part of that is we bring those soil samples to the lab, and we then test for soil health indicators. So you can't directly measure soil health, but you can rely on a suite of indicators to give you an idea of what the soil health might be. And what I mean by soil health is the ability of soil to provide the essential soil functions as a living system. So we have a suite of chemical, physical, and biological measurements. So we have some pretty key people in the room for that. So first, Susan's PI of this project. India is one of our leading soil techs. Christine is our lab manager. Where did Christine go?
She's online.
Oh, she's online. Okay, is our lab manager. And Julana and Kwahi may be online too. Okay, great. Well, so they help us run all the samples and do a very fantastic job at that. And then finally, we've worked through a lot of our sampling efforts to develop a soil health score to give an idea of how good your soil health is. Is it on the poor side? Is it high soil health? And to give you some indication on maybe how we can improve soil health. We have Christian in the back, who's our database manager for that. So it's a little bit of a background. I want to show you the extent of the work and where we started and where we've gotten since then. So this was the original survey, Hannah in that first picture. These are sampling locations that she worked at. And so you have, a couple of key things from this initial survey is that we targeted a lot of different sample sites under different land managements. And so we wanted to capture protected forests, pasture lands, cropland, and different types of cropland. So maybe cropland under conventional agricultural practices versus organic methods. And also this pile here, that's unmanaged, previously intensive agricultural lands. And so that could be lands that have been abandoned since they were under, let's say, sugarcane production. And then we have a suite of different soil orders. So there's 12 soil orders in the world. You can see we have really nice representation of those soil orders. And so we want to get a breadth of different soil types because we know that soil health may differ between soils, whether we're working in volcanic soils or grassland soils or high clay soils, for instance. So that was our initial sampling. And so actually our database, as we've grown, that initial suite of samples has actually been validated as we've grown. So Hannah did a really great job getting an expansive survey. But we've grown since then. So at the time that we developed the Soil Health Index, we had about 659 samples. Now we have nearly 1,600 samples. And so we're on our third iteration of the Soil Health Index. At this time too, you could see it came from, I think at this point we're in nearly 200 different fields. We're generally looking at between 0 and 15 centimeter depth. So we're really looking at that topsoil where most of the organic matter is. And then several different sites across the different islands, and then reaching 9 out of the 12 global soil orders. We really have good coverage in soil type. We also have the legacy, whether or not we have legacy of intensive agricultural practices, primarily on those former plantation lands, and a diverse set of land use, current land use. So here's a snapshot of our coverage that we have right now to show you what's representative, or you may also look at this and what's underrepresented in our database too, and where we need to fill those gaps. So you can see a lot of what we have in the database right now is focused on annual cropland. And then followed by forests, orchards. So we split up annual with our perennial systems. And so orchards, and then pasture following that, and then agroforestry, and then managed and abandoned, and then followed by city and state parks. So there's a lot that we can, a lot more we can do, a lot more we can sample. We have also underrepresented a lot of our loamy or wetland agriculture. So that's a huge topic. Histosols, for example. So you can see for our different soil types, we have a lot of high activity clays. That's where a lot of our cropland. So we can think about mollisols or the grassland soils, vertisols or the high clay soils. We have a lot of representation there, followed by low activity clays, which would be the more highly weathered tropical soils, and then volcanic soils. But you can see we can do more sampling with our organic soils and our sandy soils. You can also see our representation of whether or not we have these locations had a history of previously intensive agriculture. So we're about split on that. So here's the overall soil health scoring functions. This is how we score it. Like I mentioned, soil health is a concept. It can't be directly measured. And so these are our indicators. Right here, this is actually what we're measuring in the lab as a way for us to base our soil health assessments. And so this could be a potentially another opportunity to look to see whether or not these are adequately describing soil health. Maybe we're missing some important indicators of soil health. Most of these are centered on carbon and carbon cycling. We had the talk last week about carbon, and so maybe more dynamic. So we have the carbon pool, but then also different, more dynamic carbon pools, carbon cycling, nitrogen cycling. But we can certainly look at other indicators too. But from that, then we can maybe we can group these into some functional factors that gives us an idea of how these different groups of indicators are functioning, and then overall providing us with a soil health score. So this is a structural equation model because it's a latent variable. You can't directly measure it. So that's the underlying model. And an important thing to note here is that the type of soil you're working in matters. whether you're in a volcanic soil or a more rich clay fertile soil or less fertile soil, and also land use history matters too. So we can adjust this score depending on those variables. All right, so that's just a little background about the assessments that we're conducting, but I want to connect with that with some of the monitoring projects that we have at Kākoʻo. And so there are three main projects that we're involved with right now. So we have Puʻulani, which is an agroforest. On the slide that you showed up here, it was the blue dot. I don't know if you noticed the blue dot on the map. This is a pretty great place. Actually, I met Rachel for the first time volunteering here, where I'm going to show a slide next to show you a little bit more about the team, but it's a restoration project. So you can see what it looked like in 2018 versus what it looks like in 2023. And here's Miley Wong. Many of you may know Miley. She has done a lot of really great work there. So we're actively involved. We've done some monitoring over 3 times over the past 5 or 6 years, and we've continued. We have plans to continue doing that. Next is the Climate Smart projects. And for that, we are working with, well, first of all, it's the project that's sponsoring the seminar series that Susan Crow's PIL. Also, we have Kathy here that's involved in the project as well. So the purpose of this project is to work with producers to get access to federal funds to implement conservation practices. And so through here, we're working with ORCD to implement those practices at Kākoʻo. But on top of that, it's also looking at maybe which practices the NRCS are maybe not investing in or incentivizing, and where those gaps may be. And so part of it is to go back to NRCS and see what they can help support. And then lastly, we have a brand new project. So this is a collaboration between the Division of Aquatic Resources, DAR, which is part of DLNR, NERR, working with Shimi and Amy. And then we have Kākoʻo, and then Uhia Loco as well. And so those are the partners. And so that involves not just looking at Puʻulani. Puʻulani's involved in that, and then also the Malcolm Mackay Lo'i is involved in that, but also looking at wetlands. And so the Kealogi wetlands and the upward areas we're looking, as well as the Lullaby. And so we're going to do some soil health monitoring in each of those different ecosystems, as well as looking at plants and the effects of above ground plants with carbon sequestration, and then kind of matching that above ground with below ground. So it's really exciting. That project, I think, is a month in. And so we just had our initial meeting. And so I'm really interested in looking at these different systems, connecting with the above ground portion, but also connecting with these different systems and filling that gap that I mentioned before, where we don't have many wetland soil systems in our database. So this is a very important gap that we need to fill. Here is the Puʻulani team that I just wanted to highlight. Sebastian Church, he brought this. He brought our display. So you can feel free after the seminar to come and take whatever you would like to take. So there's a different assortment of plants that he's brought. There are a lot of medicinal plants in the system, but you can see the team members. We have Hugh, Tamara Tickson, who I believe was your mentor. And then we have Kiana Frank, myself as part of the UH team, and then Kākoʻo, we have Kanekoa, Nahealani, Nick, and then also Kawika as well. And so this is a really great team to work with. And as I mentioned, I think we're on our like 6th year of collaboration. One important thing that I did want to bring up that we felt was important from this collaboration, And also Lala Noose, she mentioned it in her presentation earlier this semester, is that we've worked on a soil health data policy largely with Lala as well as Kathy. Kathy led this effort where from this policy, we are stipulating the purpose for data collection, the governance, the guidance, the accuracy, the impact, the access to data, attribution, how we can reuse the data, and definitions of different data terms. And so this is a guiding document on basically whatever data we collect, what are the rules and regulations along with that. So as part of that, this was part of the governance that was important to the group, and that was to have that commitment to protecting Indigenous and local knowledge, and using the CARE principles too. And so that was an outcome of the project about a year ago. I think we finally adopted that or 6 months ago. It's about 6 months ago.
It was a little bit.
Okay. So what we did do is 1 year ago, so about exactly 1 year ago, we did meet with Kawika and Kākoʻo at ʻŌiwi, and we did share this data policy. And so right now, where it stands, for example, for the reuse for ʻŌiwi, we have a restricted reuse. That's only with data provided permissions that we reuse that data. And then step 2 with this, so then we met and we discussed the data policy, and now we're working towards the 3rd step of co-developing the research process. And then we worked through NERR with Shimi, and this has kind of been an iterative process. So we've had, I think Shimi and I have had two meetings with some phone discussions in between about how we're going to co-develop research, and within our larger goals on these different projects that involve the stewardship and collection and presentation of data. So this is our ending slide. I don't know if you would like to say anything here, but these are some questions, or when we met previously, where we're at in this process. And so we have a couple of key points. I think we have 15 minutes for discussion. And so these could be some discussion points that we can have, unless others have questions. But the 5 points that we discussed was valuing the co-location of research initiatives. Each of those 3 projects that we have overlapping goals. And so we've been building upon that. I'm recognizing that university science is reductionism, whereas Indigenous science is holistic. Identifying what questions we're not asking. There's a lot of gaps in our database, and maybe we're too narrowly focused on certain aspects or themes. There's also a disconnect between where Indigenous agriculture has taken place versus where it's practiced today. And then also how we can connect synergistic pieces with what we're working on, if you'd like to add anything.
You did a great job.
Okay, so I guess we can open up for questions, but I'll keep this one up. Thank you, Sue. Food for thought.